Well, good afternoon and welcome. It's my very great pleasure to introduce Angela Wren to you. Angela is a prolific crime writer. Well, she's done a lot more books than I have, let's put it that way. That's prolific. She has a series of novels about a French detective called Jacques Foray. Have I got Foray? Got to get the pronunciation right. And also contributes to anthologies. So what we're going to do is slightly differently this time to previous ones. Angela and I are going to talk about anthologies. She's going to read a part of a story from her latest work. And then we're going to talk about NaNoWriMo, if I've got that quite in the right, and explain what it is and can you write a book in the month. So that's what we're up to now. So without further ado, may I ask you to read?
Okay, thank you, Sue. Yes, I do write the Jacques Foray novels, which are all set in the Cevennes in south central France. And the Cevennes is about 1,000 kilometres south of here. So it's quite a long way down. Apart from writing the novels, and there are 6 of them available at the moment, I also write short stories, and I always have written short stories from being, about 7 or 8 years old. And I have, since I got published, I've been able to contribute some of my short stories to actual publications. And I'm a member of the Miss Moonshine group. We write, there are 9 of us, and we write feel-good, heartwarming kind of romantic stories, but of course I cannot stop myself putting a bit of a mystery in there somewhere. And there are 3 Miss Moonshine anthologies that are out at the moment. I also work with 8 other Canadian authors, so we do everything by email. We haven't even had a Zoom meeting yet, and we've been writing for 4 years, and we've got 3 books out. And it's from that book that we've just published that I want to introduce you to one of my new characters, one of my newest characters. The book is called Spring Paths, and there are 9 stories in there, and mine, of course, is a bit of a mystery. In fact, it's a mystery that is not quite what it seems at the outset. And I want to introduce you to Alice Tomlinson. She's English, and she is, in the story, she is currently living in France, in central France, in a tiny village called Beauregard. And if you wanted to get to Beauregard from Harrogate today, you would be travelling more or less as the crow flies for about 600 miles. So it is in central France. And so the weather's usually better than it is here in England. Of that I can assure you. Okay, so this is just the opening of this particular story. Madame Bovary's Curio Shop, and we're in the village of Beauregard in 1983. There was something decidedly odd about Madame Bovary, Alice Tomlinson concluded as she gazed out of the window of La Vielle Rue, the local bar and restaurant. "Not least your name, nor its spelling," she muttered as she ripped her croissant into 3 before devouring a chunk. Wiping her fingers on the small serviette that Eric had delivered to the table, along with her meagre breakfast, she focused her attention on the activity across the road. Her wide coffee cup cradled in her hands, Alice watched as the sprightly octogenarian, was she really that old, moved bits and pieces of stock out onto the pavement. The lifting and shifting complete, Madame Bovary straightened her back and paused momentarily. "And that's just what I mean," Alice whispered. "That pose, there's something just not quite right about it." Her head on one side, Alice observed Madame Bovary as she strode back into the shop. "And exactly how old are you?" She took another sip of her lukewarm coffee. Her glance shifted to the old-fashioned, black-painted wooden frontage with faded gold lettering above the substantial window. "Brocante de Bovary." Alice smiled as she recalled the sparkling blue and white stoned brooch that Madame Bovary always wore to secure one of her many silk scarves about her neck. She wondered which came first, the double BB of the jewellery or the name of the business. "Another coffee, Alice?" Eric called across the space as he reached for a fresh cup and saucer. Alice nodded. collected her breakfast crockery together and moved to the bar. "Nothing ever changes here, does it, Eric?" The pots were deposited on the counter with a rattle. "Not really," he said over the whoosh of the coffee machine as it delivered another café au lait. "Just like Madame Bovary," Alice said as she leaned back against the bar, her gaze firmly fixed on the large window and the view of the shop owner winding out the canvas awning to protect her goods from the sun. "I've been here for 2 months now, and Madame Bovary does exactly the same thing every day. Does she ever sell anything from that business of hers?" Alice blinked away the assault on her sight of the almost neon green the almost neon green of Madame Bovary's top for the day, which neither matched nor complemented the lurid purple of her skirt. Alice turned to face Eric. "She even wears the same sort of clothes, which she changes regularly every day." Eric smiled. "Perhaps her dress is a little eccentric, but Madame Bovary has been here a very long time," he said. "Well, for as long as I can remember. Some say she bought that place before the war, just after the war. But with so many displaced people and things, I suppose she thought she could make a decent living back then." He slid the fresh coffee across the counter. "Thanks," said Alice, adding some sugar and stirring. Yes. I can see why she might take on house clearances, buying and selling and so on. But it looks very mundane, old-fashioned stuff to me. Have you been inside?" Alice shook her head. "What I do know is that you can find anything in that place." He glanced at the light fittings on the walls that had recently been redecorated. Alice followed his gaze. "From Madame's brocante?" She took a sip of her coffee. Eric nodded as he turned his attention to his washing up. "Those two on the far wall, and her place was the only one who had them." Alice looked at each of the 4 sconces. "Yes," she thought. "They are a perfect match, and they look to be 1930s in style and design, and probably genuine. I might pay Madame Bovary a visit," she said, before taking a gulp of the sweet, milky drink. And it's when she enters the shop that the story really takes off.
Thank you. It sounds very intriguing. Did you have lots of fun imagining the shop, or have you actually seen a similar shop in real life in France?
I've actually seen the shop that I describe in the story, and no, it wasn't in France. It was actually in a tiny little place called Sutton-on-Sea in Lincolnshire, and it was the kind of shop where you went in and you didn't dare breathe. And you kind of had to move along the shelves like this, because if you turned round, stuff would fall off. And the shop was absolutely jam-packed from floor to ceiling with all kinds of second-hand stuff, chipped plates and strange china and statues. And every space of ceiling, every inch of ceiling was covered with lights and that sort of stuff. And I was so captivated by what this shop looked like, I thought to myself, I must write that down. So as soon as I got back home, I started writing notes about what the shop looked like. And it was only when we came round to developing spring paths and I started thinking about the story for it, and I thought, oh yes, I thought, that shop and that lady in that shop, there's something seriously mysterious about her. And yes, there is, but I'm not going to tell you what it is.
And so the shop owner was actually the lady who runs the shop in Lincolnshire. Well, with a little bit of artistry.
No, I can assure you that my Madame Bovary, although she might look and dress a little bit like the lady in the shop in Lincolnshire, she is quite definitely not that lady.
I'm quite intrigued now. I'm just thinking perhaps a trip to Lincolnshire just to find this place. So, yeah, sounds great fun. So thank you. You've said you've done you're in 3 groups of anthologies, really. So you're obviously writing a lot of short stories, or have written a lot of short stories. And you say you work in a collaboration. Is that actually you just all decide what you're going to do and you give the stories, or do you actually work together? If you get a bit stuck with the story, or do the others help out?
It varies from anthology to anthology. For the Moonshine stories, the Miss M stories, we have a single character that runs through all of the 9 stories, and that's Miss Moonshine. And she appears in each of the stories and is sometimes quite different in each of the stories, but then Miss Moonshine is whoever she needs to be to the central character within that story, and we all know that. We all attribute Miss Moonshine as having a little bit of magic about her as a person. So she can be different things. And, you know, I mean, in one of the stories, she's wearing Wellington boots and is a guerrilla gardener. In another story, she's just a very elegant lady who dresses like it's the 1940s and is very wise. So she's a really quite magical person. So in order to get the consistency for Miss M, we all have to meet regularly and talk about stuff. We had some basic ideas about what Miss M's personality was before we started the first book. But we quickly realised when all of the stories were put together that we needed to do some more thinking because she was too different in some respects. So we had a meeting in Hebden Bridge, which is where we always meet. We had cake and coffee and quite a lot of cake. And we had quite a long discussion, which meant more cake. And, you know, we ironed out the difficulties. With the Paths anthologies, the situation is quite different because the Paths anthologies are multi-genre stories, multi-genre anthologies, and we all take a theme. So we have autumn paths, winter paths, and spring paths, and if you think about each of those phrases, they can mean so many different things to different people. I mean, a path, it could be a path in life, it could just be an actual path, you know, it could be gravel, it could be a piece of tarmac, it could be a mythical path. And of course, the seasons themselves suggest different things to different people. They all, to me, they just suggest a whole series of different colour schemes. And I've kind of based most of my stories around those kind of colour schemes. But with the Canadian authors, of course, we can only do everything by email. And I think we've had one discussion about, well, shall we have a Zoom meeting? And we kind of all went, no, we'll just do it by email, shall we? We're happy, let's do it like this. So I've actually never met the 8 other authors on Spring Paths and the other Paths anthologies, whereas I'm able to meet the English authors for Miss M on a regular basis. In fact, we're meeting next month.
Miss M sounds quite mysterious.
She is. She is. And you know, and as an actor, if we ever got one of those stories or some of those stories adapted for TV or film, I'd be there first in the queue. I'd want to play her.
Sounds great fun. So do you find, not so much with the Miss M stories, do you find that sometimes you have to alter your story so it fits in with everybody else? Or are you usually fairly lucky and it all works smoothly, ever optimistic?
So far, everything has kind of gelled pretty much.
Yeah.
And, you know, 1 or 2 minor details have had to be changed. And for the Paths anthologies, because we all write in different genres, it doesn't really matter that there is that difference. We set up those anthologies with the precise intention of having a selection of stories that were all different, but just linked by a single theme, i.e. a season. And we wanted them to be different because the whole point of it was to kind of cross-fertilise reading audiences. Does that make any sense? Yeah. You know, and the Canadians are getting more English readers as a result, and I'm getting quite a bit of interest in Canada too. So
that works both ways, doesn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, authors don't like to talk about marketing because we tend not to be terribly good at it, but if I'm totally honest. But it is interesting, isn't it, how you get your books out there and where your books end up.
Yeah.
So, I have to ask this because I've written short stories and I find them quite tough because you haven't got a lot of wriggle room. If you don't like, you start off and you don't like one character, if you've got a whole book to play with, you can do all sorts of things with that character. When you've got 3,500 words or however long, I find it much harder. Do you find writing short stories easy or are they a bit of a challenge?
I wouldn't say I find them easy. I do enjoy them because the Jack Foray stories, for instance, I'm kind of fixed on a train track. You know, he's an established character. We know where he lives, and my readership knows about where he lives and the people in the village. So I'm kind of on a bit of a fixed track with that. The great thing about a short story is I can go anywhere in my head, literally anywhere, and I like that. My publisher also produces some charity anthologies, and as an example of going absolutely anywhere in my head, there is a story in Dark Paris, because these are the Dark World anthologies. There's a story in Dark Paris that I wrote, which is set in the Père Lachaise cemetery in the centre of Paris, and it's a 6,500 word monologue of the spirit of a white raven. I don't know where that came from, but it worked. And I really enjoyed writing that particular story. But what I find is the most difficult thing with short stories is you've got a word limit.
Yes.
And it doesn't matter whether it's 1,000, 2,000 or 8 or 10,000. You've still got that word limit. And if you're not careful, you run out of space for your actual story, which is why I think that when you're writing short stories, you should plan it to the same extent as you do a whole novel. And I'm not suggesting that you plan every single scene, but and I don't plan every single scene, but I do with my novels. I do have to know where I'm going. So I know who my victim is, that's who I start with, that's my first character that I build. I know what their connection is with the location that the victim is killed in. I know how the connection works to Jacques and to his team, and I build it out like that, so that I have got a kind of structure for the novel. So if I'm writing a short story, I do exactly the same thing, but it's in a kind of microcosm because I've got fewer words.
Can I ask an off-the-cuff question? I mean, we know ravens are normally black, so why was yours white? Sorry, putting you on the spot there.
He was a white raven because he was the spirit of a statue of a white raven that sat on top of one of the gravestones in the graveyard. And what had happened was the gravestone had broken. I mean, this isn't explained in the story, you have to work this out for yourself, which means I'm telling the story, which is ruining it for you.
I'm so sorry. But I was just intrigued, you know, was he an albino raven? I don't know, do you get those?
Yes, you do actually.
Do you?
They do happen, but very, very rarely. And the gravestone had fallen over and he was broken. And that was how his spirit was released.
Oh, right.
And then during the course of the story, the stonemason is there fixing the gravestone, and eventually, right at the end, he's recaptured and put back in his stone body. I know, weird, and yeah, I don't know where that came from.
That sounds a great story, doesn't it? It's fantastic imagination. Apart from when you get somebody like me saying, well, why was he a white raven, not a black one? But there you go. There's always an explanation for everything. So what are you planning to write next? Is it going to be more short stories? Is it going to be another novel in your Jacques Foray series?
Actually, what I'm doing at the moment, and actually physically doing, is that I'm kind of doing NaNoWriMo this year, but kind of not. And the whole point of NaNoWriMo is that you write 50,000 words during the course of the month, from the 1st to the 30th of November. That's the actual challenge. And I have done that previously. But what I'm actually doing with this month of November is that I am editing my current work in progress, which is an Alice Tomlinson story, and it is a full-length novel, and I've challenged myself to use NaNoWriMo as my time period for getting that story properly licked into shape and at the point where I can submit it on the 1st or 2nd of December.
Right. And which brings me beautifully in, if you've never heard of NaNoWriMo, which is a bit of a mouthful, but it actually stands for National Novel Writing Month, and November is National Novel Writing Month. And the challenge, it's an international challenge. It's an organisation based in California. They're not for profit, so you can sign up for free, which is excellent. The challenge is to write 50,000 words in a month, which is a heck of a challenge. Although if you break that down, because I've been looking at that, it's just under 1,700 words a day. When you go on their website, and unfortunately I didn't write down, there are lots and lots of people who sign up to do the challenge every year. It's been running since 1999. But a very small minority actually complete it. And I think I'm fair to say that you are one of that special minority, are you not?
Yeah. I didn't. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thank you. It was a few years ago, and I didn't realise it was such a small percentage rate of success actually. But anyway, so yes, I did sign up to do NaNoWriMo properly. About 8 or 9 years ago, and yes, I was sat there at my computer every day doing this, getting my 1,700 words down as fast as I possibly could. Sometimes I managed to do more in each day, but what I found when I got to December 1st and I was looking back over the story that I'd written was that, yep, there were over 50,000 words there. They weren't necessarily all in the right order, and the story, of course, was completely linear. So it kind of started at the beginning and just went right on to the end. And when I started looking at it and thinking, oh, I've got to do something with this and knock it into shape, I realised that the structure was completely wrong for the story that I was trying to tell. And that, yes, there were quite a lot of mistakes in the text as well, because you're writing at such a speed, even though you might think you're not doing that, because of course we've all got something else to do in the day, haven't we, rather than just sit at the computer and produce 1,700 words. So there were lots of things wrong with it, and it took about 3 months afterwards for me to not exactly rewrite it, but to polish it, edit it, revise some of the scenes. I actually chucked a few scenes as well, absolutely dumped them, and then when I got to the end of that 3 months, I thought, yeah, I've got a story here that might actually go somewhere. So I took it to my writing group, and one of the ladies in my writing group would take a couple of chapters that week, and then a fortnight later she would bring the couple of chapters back with all her comments on there.
Oh, gosh.
And she I'm not making any judgments here, but she was an English teacher. And so you can imagine the level of the red pen. And that was when I realised that, well, about halfway through that process, I realised that I really needed to think about, one, the type of story that I wanted to write, really wanted to write. Two, once I'd made that decision, I realised that the story that I'd just written through NaNoWriMo and all the revisions that I'd done for my colleague in the writing group, weren't going to fit what I decided was my right route. So I kind of just stuck it in a drawer and left it there. Went on to doing the Jack novels and various other stuff, and as it happened, during the first lockdown, I was doing some clearing out, because, you know, what else have you got to do after doing all the hoovering and dusting and all the writing, you know, and you can't go anywhere. So I thought I'd better do some sorting out, and I found this thing in the bottom of the drawer. Started reading it, and I thought, oh God. I thought, this is terrible. This is absolutely terrible. But I checked to see if I'd still got the electronic copy, and I still had the electronic copy. So the paper copy got shredded, just absolutely shredded. And the electronic copy then got sorted, and I took out the very best bits. Some of the best bits were just a couple of sentences. Sometimes it was a whole scene. And I kept those, and I put them in what I call my word dump. And they are there. Some of them have been reused and repurposed, but the rest of it is still there, and those words may or may not get used. I don't know.
It's amazing, isn't it? I belong to a couple of writing groups, and there are always English teachers in the writing group, and they always go through comma, no comma. Look, I'm happy with that. No, can't do it that way. Occupational hazard, I think, of belonging to a writing group. However, they also save you from doing some absolute howlers that people will be picking up forevermore, saying, did you know you put that in the wrong place? So that's really quite helpful. To go back to your experience and your poor novel that sort of got shredded and
No, absolutely.
chewed up
Physically
and
shredded, yeah.
chewed up and that. 50,000 words shredded. I mean, that's heresy. But how did you... I presume you weren't one of these brave people who sat down on the 1st of November and said, I am going to write 50,000 words.
Not quite. I had done a bit of planning. I mean, I knew what my story was, and it was going to be a romance, and it was also going to be set in France. So I'd done a bit of research, so I knew what I wanted to write. I knew who my two central characters were, although I did realise about halfway through the month that I perhaps didn't know my central characters quite as well as I thought I did. So I had to do some quick thinking, and I kind of made stuff up on the hoof, or is it on the keyboard, whichever. So, and that was why, in some respects, when I reviewed it and revised it, I realised that the story itself, whilst it was a good challenge, and it made me very disciplined about my writing, it perhaps wasn't a very good story in the first place.
Oh, that's a shame.
Well, it's never been published, it never is going to be published, so, you know, that says a lot, I think, doesn't it?
We were chatting before you came about the whole NaNoWriMo thing. They have a massive website, and you were saying that they're really, really helpful. They do all sorts of regional groups and things.
Yes, if you decide to sign up, and as Sue has already said, it is for free, on their big website you can find people who are in your region. And I seem to recollect that there are quite a lot of people in Leeds, which isn't that far from where I live. And although I didn't go to any of the meetups, because I was at that time working in the theatre, and they were having a meetup one day for lunch, and it just happened to be that it was my shift at the theatre, and trying to change your shift, it was just a nightmare. So I didn't go. But there are things that are organised like that. And the other thing about it is that if you find contacts within your area who are happy to talk to you over email or on Zoom or whatever, you can link up with other people like that. And it is a good thing to do, because being sat at your computer for a whole 30 days is really quite lonely. And there are times when you need to say to somebody, oh God, I've got this knot on page 64 and I just don't know what to do with it. And at least if you've got somebody who can either bounce an email back to you and say, well, actually, have you thought about this? Have you thought about that? It does help. And I think generally all writers, when they're writing, really do need somebody that
they need their tribe, as they say these days.
They do need somebody to occasionally rant to, ask questions of, and sometimes just listen.
Yes. My poor husband is sitting quietly at the back. That's his job. He's pulling faces at me now, but yeah. When you'd finished this, and you sort of did you ever sort of think that you might try it again, or was that the one and only time you were ever going to do that?
No, I did try it again about 2 or 3 years after that first occasion, and because I'd planned more carefully and I knew what story I was writing, I wanted to use what was left, NaNoWriMo, to finish what was left of my actual story, but it proved to be counterproductive.
Oh, right.
In many respects, because the one thing I've realised about writing is that my writing process is very simple. I think a lot, then I type a lot, and then I submit. And at the point when I tried to do NaNoWriMo the second time, I was actually still in the thinking a lot stage. I mean, I've been typing as well, but I wasn't at the point where I could just sit down and type and get the story out. So I failed that year.
Oh dear. Oh well, I mean, one is more than enough. But so thinking, we did have a rash discussion in our household whether it would actually be possible to do next year. Now we're thinking about that. We may not, but how soon can you start plotting and planning for your November write-up?
If you are going to do NaNoWriMo, for me personally, I would need to be thinking about that story from about May time.
Right.
Something like that.
So you've got a good 6 months lead in thinking about the characters, the plot. what you're going to do, and then 1st of November just go for it.
You could do it like that, yes. I tend, as I say, I tend to do an awful lot of thinking, then I do my typing and do an awful lot of typing, then sometimes I will stop because I need to think about something, because one of my characters has gone off and done something that is not in the plan. So I have to think about that.
Characters do that, don't they? You think you've got them all nicely sort of arranged, and then they go and do something, you think, well, I didn't tell you could do that, and they're off.
And Jack's the worst. He really is the worst. But don't tell him I said that.
Certainly not. They do become real. That's the other scary thing about your characters. Some of the characters that we have written about, or I've written about, I know what they look like. I know, even down to their weights, if you really push me. And they are so real. I'm not sure if that's a good thing, though, because perhaps when you're writing, sometimes I do shortcuts because I know what they look like. I assume everybody else knows what they look like too, which might be a bit of a challenge. But perhaps you're more disciplined than that.
I think you do have to know your characters that well. I really do. And like you, I mean, all my characters have a date of birth, they have a height, a weight. I know exactly what they look like. I know what's in their wardrobe. I know exactly what is in Jack's wardrobe. Every single thing, right down to his Pierre Cardin underpants. You know, he wears loafers. I know what sort of shoes he wears. And I think you do need to know your characters that well. And I think you have to have a starting point, i.e. your date of birth, because you need to know what things they've lived through. Because the things that we live through, the experiences that we have, make us the people that we are. And so if you don't understand that about your character, how can you make your character make the right choice when you put him in a difficult situation? And let's face it, when you're writing crime, Jack is always finding himself in a difficult situation of one form or another. And unless I'm inside his head, I don't understand how I can make him behave in the right way in that particular situation that is also right for the reader.
And is it a modern sort of 2020s?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, so you have to be up to date with sort of French police procedure or at least reasonable knowledge.
Well, you can fudge the police procedure. I don't write police procedurals. I write cosy crime. And in the first book, Jack is a serving gendarme in the Royal Gendarmerie in the Cevennes. Before that, he was born and brought up in Paris, and he was a detective in the Sûreté in Paris. But because of something that happened whilst he was on duty, he got a wound in the shoulder, and it made him rethink his life, and that was why he ended up in the Royal Gendarmerie at the start of book 1. But during the course of book 1, he realises that life still isn't quite right, and that he needs to make a decision one way or the other, and that's why in book 2 he is a private detective.
I have to say, I suspect it's a touch easier as well, because
yeah.
Police procedures now are just so complicated, aren't they?
Yeah. I mean, if you want to read a police procedural, then read the Roy Grace novels by Peter James.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
He's really seriously into police procedure, and he works with the Brighton and Hove Police. He's got friends there and he consults them and so on. But when it comes to police procedure, you can to a certain extent fudge it anyway, just by the words that you choose. And if people watch police procedurals on the telly, and you use the right words to convey an impression, they will come away with the impression that they've seen on the telly, not perhaps what you might actually be thinking you're trying to cover up, because you're not 100% sure. So there's ways of doing it.
Sorry, giving away trade secrets here.
No.
but important.
Wipe that from your heads.
And let's be honest, there is nothing more dull than going through procedure after procedure, as is with any job, isn't it? There's always half a ton of procedures that you have to plough through, but you don't want all the boring bits in novels or in TV or film either.
Not really.
Yeah. So going back to the NaNoWriMo, you said about the regional group. Is there any sort of community after you finished, or is it just, oh, thank God for that, I'm done, and that's...
You get a nice little certificate saying you've done your 50,000 words, so that's quite cute. And yes, I have got one of those somewhere in a drawer, I think. Probably. Oh, it might have been shredded with the book. Not sure.
Dear, oh dear.
But there is an ongoing community because they do run other events through the year. There's a poetry event, I think, in the summer. It might be June or July. I can't remember off the top of my head. And there are occasions where, you know, they have little get-togethers in preparation for NaNoWriMo. So there are other things that go on just outside the month, you know, outside the month of November. It's not just for that.
I know they have camp writing, but I'm never quite sure. Is this like the campfire stories? Is that the idea of it?
No, I think it's about going away to, you know, like American camp.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that kind of thing.
Oh, right.
And people going away and doing that and doing writing whilst they're there.
That sounds very civilised. Probably expensive, but very civilised.
I would expect so.
So, with your experience, would you recommend it to other writers?
Yeah, I would actually, because it's a good challenge, and you know, and especially if you've reached a point in your writing where you don't know what to do, or you get to the computer and you think, oh, I can't be bothered today. It would be a good thing to set you thinking, and it would give you something to aim for, and yeah. 50,000 words in 30 days is quite an achievement, really, when you think about it. So yes, I would recommend it, I think. And of course, because there's all the interaction between the people doing it, you can make friends with new writers, and you can get a new perspective on your own writing, which I think is always worthwhile.
Yeah. So, anybody looking to volunteer for next year? There's a stunned, horrified Sire. Actually, it's worth going on to the homepage, and they have lots of, you know, the usual frequently asked questions, and it's quite reassuring because they say every November people from all sorts of backgrounds will have a go. And the nicest thing is, don't worry if you think it's rubbish. Most books start off by being sort of rubbish, but obviously, like Angela's explained, you know, it's when you finish your 50,000 words, you look at it and think, can I polish this and make something out of it, or sadly just shred it. Or shred it.
That's a few years later.
Has anybody got any questions of Angela? I think we've stunned them into silence.
Oh dear.
Please.
Or Irish or something like that.
Yeah, I do.
That's a nice thing. If you set your characters in Harrogate, perhaps you'll tell me otherwise, but there isn't a precise Harrogate accent. It's a sort of a little bit of Yorkshire, but it could be anywhere, sort of touch of the rural and all sorts. So my ladies, when I write, they don't have to have accents because they all come from Harrogate. It makes life so much easier. But, oh, very posh. You know, they come from Harrogate, so it's, yes. I shall use that next time. we're posh Yorkshire. Are there any other questions? Well, thank you for that, and now thank you very much for coming. If you want to come and have a chat to Angela, because it's far easier than sort of asking big questions, please do. Thank you very much.
I have some books as well.